Welcome back to the Shuffle Squad. Zach Lesage here. Today we're going to be covering over the top 10 best decks. With many people off for the holidays, there hasn't been too many tournaments to adjust the top 10 decks this week, but there has been some slight movement to adjust for the metagame that formulated around Toronto Regionals. If you haven't watched any one of these videos before, well, you're in for a treat. Be sure to give this video a like. Let us know in the comments what you think the top 10 best decks are. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Get those subscribes in before 2025. We will be covering over each deck list individually, going over why it's there, maybe some key strategy or anything of the sorts. And a lot of these decks are going to be based off of tournament rankings, tournament finishes, stuff like that. It's not biased by any means. Of course, I do choose the final positioning of every single deck, but a lot of it's based off of tournament results. There's a lot to cover here, so let's jump into our number 10 pick. Kicking off our top 10 list this week is going to be Maron EX. Maron EX had that super successful tournament win with landing Caitlyn, winning Sacramento Regionals. The deck also placed second, but has since fallen off a little bit due to a rise in Charizard elsewhere in the metagame, with Charizard not necessarily seeing as much success at Toronto Regionals. I think there's a place for Maron EX, and it's kicked out Ancient Box, my beloved deck from number 10 last week. Now, just because a deck's not on this list does not necessarily mean that it's not successful. For Toronto Regionals, I brought over 30 decks, and sometimes I'll play decks in the top 20, the top 25, even top 30, depending on how the metagame shifts. So just because the deck is not on this list does not mean it's not 11th, 12th, 13th, even 20th. Play whichever decks you want to play. This is just merely a list of successful decks from my opinion and tournament results. Maron EX is all about using Tandem Unit to search your deck for 2 basic lightning Pokemon, and in that case you could rip an electric generator and rip those energies onto that Pokemon, so you can attack with Photon Blaster or Raikou with a huge bench. We do have the Area 0 Underdepths package with the Terra-type Pikachu EX, giving us a lot of opportunities for having tech Pokemon, such as Latias EX, Squawkabilly, all these kinds of things. Now, I think the biggest change that I have in my list is having a Blood Moon Ursaluna EX for a late game attacking option. You can even trigger your ability a little bit sooner by using Magneton to maybe set up the game with 2 attacking Pokemon. If you want to get access to this list or any of the other lists in this video, check out our pinned comment below. You can copy and paste those decks right into PTCG Live. And if you're missing any of the cards for those decks in PTCG Live, check out our sponsor at ptcgostore.com and plug in code TSS5. If you need any of these cards physically, check out our sponsor at kfabecards.com. Both links are available in the description alongside with any discount codes if you're trying to get those cards in real life. Let's jump into number 9. At number 9, we have Gango EX. Now, Gango EX getting that Energy Surge Pro from Surging Sparks gives you an opportunity to make this deck pretty decent. And I think it's one of those cases where it's seen some light results, but it's also had some results for some top players that have fallen completely off. It might not necessarily be the most consistent deck in the world, but a deck that plays 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different energy kinds, that might just be a little bit too much at times. Maybe sometimes you're missing that metal energy. Energy Surge Pro is prize, and that could just be one of the issues of this deck. On top of using Cypher Maniac's code breaking, kind of a card that allows you to place cards on top of your deck, certainly powerful. That could be one of the reasons that holds this deck back. Now, that's when this deck's not doing well. When this deck is doing well, you're ripping a bunch of energies to make it rain on your opponent's Pokemon. So if your opponent has a Dragapult in play, you could just toss 7 of those energies, I hope I'm doing my math right here on this video, to do 350 damage to knock it out. Same thing with a Charizard EX. So we have a lot of opportunities to just rip into our opponent's Pokemon, draw cards with coin bonus, Pheasantipity, Radiant Greninja, and really just see success with this deck. There are some other versions that play Palkia V-Star to accelerate energies onto Radiant Greninja to have an auxiliary attacker, but I think that the version with Togekiss solves a lot of the issues of this deck. Now, another thing that's holding this deck back was there wasn't as many aggressive big basic decks in format. Decks like Raging Bolts, Miraidon, Roaring Moon EX, and Gouging Fire somehow found themselves out of the metagame, again, probably largely thanks to our pal Charizard EX. Now that those decks are starting to re-enter the metagame, as we saw in number 10 with Miraidon EX, decks like Gango EX might have a chance to shine we might see this deck kind of move up in the top 10 rankings as the week progresses. At number 8, we have Cloth with Terapagos EX. For me, this is one of the decks that I always want to play. I was so close to playing it to Toronto Regionals, and I think it's just because I really like Terapagos EX, and Cloth is really a funny deck. It's a funny Pokemon, bunch of different attacks, using special conditions, and I don't feel like enough players have done their homework against this deck. They don't necessarily understand the damage output that Unhinged Scissors can do, how Petulant with Radiant Hisuian Sneasler, with Binding Mochi, or any of these cards, like how it all works together. So I really think that there's something here. A lot of top players might have done their homework, and I think that's really where the deck fell a little bit flat at Toronto. There was still some successful runs of this deck at Toronto, and I think it's something where maybe by the time San Antonio goes, this deck was at an all-time, like, kind of discovered at Sacramento, at least in North America, saw peak success at Stuttgart. Toronto gets countered a little bit. Now it's like kind of here, and we're at this like holiday kind of no one's really playing too much Pokemon. We were just watching Champions Leagues out in Japan. There's a few kind of ball leagues going on throughout Asia, but in terms of like our North American circuit, we're really looking at San Antonio, and I think before then there's Rio and there's Birmingham regionals. So if a deck like Cloth can lay low those regionals, I think it can kind of make a big return at San Antonio or one of these future events, because the deck is kind of having access to the 4 double turbo energies, powering up its different Pokemon. The Hisuian Electrode V can work against Charizard. We have just a lot of options when it comes down to it. I recently covered kind of how to play guide for Cloth on the channel. So if you haven't got a chance to check that out, be sure to check that out. It's also a great time to let you know if you haven't put your comments in for the best decks. Any comments, even if it's just like, yo, Zach, what's up? Happy holidays, or I'm first to the video, anything really does help boost the YouTube algorithm, and that would be much appreciated for this video. Let's jump into our number 7 deck. At number 7 this week, we have Raging Bolt EX. Like Maron EX, these turbo aggressive basic decks are coming back into the metagame. So if you've been a fan of Raging Bolt for a while, this is your best chance to see success in a minute. We want to beat Regidrago, so I need an army of Raging Bolts, Miraidons, couple Roaring Moons, Gouging Fires. Even I'll take some Chen Pows even, and we can kind of knock out these Regidragos. We need something that can maybe outspeed them a little bit. It's not always going to be perfect because they have that Alolan Executor EX that can use Swinging Sphere and knock out a Bravery Charmed Raging Bolt EX. But there's a reason why we're cutting down on Bravery Charms and updated this deck a little bit. I went through kind of an analysis of how this deck should work out. And first and foremost, our goal is going to be using Bellowing Thunder, ripping a bunch of energies, using Teal Mass to get some of those energies, Professor Sawdust to get some of those energies, ripping them from play. But I did look over the deck and adjusted the counts appropriately. I don't think my last list was as good as I wanted it to be. I think that this list is a lot better in comparison. So if you watch last week's video and you're like, hey, I thought that your last list was a little bit funky, you're probably right. These counts reflect more of a average Raging Bolt deck or a more common Raging Bolt deck than what we've been seeing for a bit. So I hope that that helps out a lot when it comes to kind of adjusting your play style. Nothing too different, but just like proper counts of shoes and retrievals, and sometimes I gotta adjust my lists, and I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. So Raging Bolt EX back into the metagame. This list, new and improved. Try it out. I think it's a sick list. It's been working really great for me in testing. And I think it's one of those things where it's probably one of your best chances to beat Regidrago if you're not playing Regidrago yourself. At number 6 this week, we have Dragapult EX with Iron Thorns EX. Now, this is a deck that kind of popped off at Stuttgart. I know we've seen it a few times before that. And most recently at Toronto, I think that JW's list probably did it the best that I've seen it. I really like the addition of the Klefki. I like the fighting type Toedscruel. I know it's just like small details, but I think it's kind of like the perfection mindset of when it comes to creating a deck, like finding the best Pokemon to evolve from and stuff like that. Goal of this deck is to really be Iron Thorns in the front, Dragapult in the back, or vice versa. Really giving yourselves an opportunity to use Iron Thorns to block those Pokemons that have abilities that you can block, And if not, then we're going to kind of go with a Phantom Dive approach to most matchups. And that's enough to slow your opponent down, especially when you're ripping them with an Iono and having access to Crispin to load up energies, all of these different cards. And being a relatively new deck, similar to Cloth to the metagame, people might not necessarily have studied against this one. So for me, I think that it's pretty basic. It can be incredibly powerful. Sometimes this deck will flop on itself. I think it's just the point of when this deck works, it works. And that's really what brings it all the way to number 6. I think there's a lot of decks that have a lot of abilities. There's a lot of single prize card Pokemon decks that you can use Phantom Dive against. Phantom Dive is a multi kind of target approach, which gives you opportunities to just kind of place damage counters better than your opponent has access to. The Toad Scroll kind of ties it all together with its Slime Mold Colony ability. So stopping your opponent from retrieving some cards back, which can be great against Goldango, Regidrago. It's just like a very good ability in this particular format. So right now, I think that everything kind of works together as kind of an anti-meta deck right now. Decks like this can sometimes hit new peaks. I wouldn't be surprised if this deck fell off a little bit as we reach closer to prismatic evolutions. At number 5 this week, we have Lugia V-Star. Now, Lugia V-Star coming back into the metagame a little bit. I feel like there's a less lightning type decks. I know we've seen both Dragapult, Iron Thorns, and Miraidon, but it's not as much as what it was. And I think Miraidon slowly creeping back in the metagame. So meta share is probably still a little bit low, not the same that it was after Sacramento when it was like 15% of the metagame. I could be off a little bit with those numbers, but Lugia wants to avoid those lightning type Pokemon due to weakness. And of course, most lightning type decks are also running Iron Hands EX, being able to draw extra prize cards. Now, this build, I believe, is Kieran Farah's exact 60 right now. They are the Lugia leader, the master of us all. So it's one of those things where I'm definitely going to go with the expert opinion whenever I can. Lugia's goal is to rip those Archeops into the discard pile and summon them back with Lugia's Summoning Star ability. We have a handful of different tech Pokemon like Chinchino, Weirdeer, Iron Hands, and Wellspring Ogerpon EX that can all be accelerated energies with Primal Turbo on that Archeops. So that's why we have all those different energies. For both the Wellspring and the Iron Hands EX, we have Legacy Energy that we can attach to those Pokemon. If you use Wellspring first, maybe against a single prize card Pokemon deck, or a deck that evolves from a single prize card Pokemon, you might be able to take multiple prize cards with Torrential Pump, shuffling that Legacy Energy back into your deck so you have access to use Ampy Very Much with Iron Hands EX later on in the game. This deck has arguably seen some of the most success in Pokemon TCG's history, so if you haven't got a chance to try out Lugia V-Star, the deck's probably going to rotate in the next couple months, so definitely give it a try. It's just super powerful, and I think with less lightning decks in the formats, now it's really this deck's time to shine again. Blocking the way at number 4, we have Snorlax Control. Snorlax has been a powerful deck in our format for a while, and is largely the most successful control deck that we have in our format. I mean, I guess I could be slightly debatable with Pidgeot Control, but Pidgeot Control really only gets 1 or 2 placements per regionals, and then Snorlax is really the one that takes over. This one might be a little bit easier to play than Pidgeot, but nonetheless, it's seen more success overall. The list that I'm looking at right here is Cyrus Davis's and Dennis Proff's that they played to Toronto Regionals. I believe they made top 64, top 32 respectively. And really, I like the boxed order build that they have. I think this is a little bit better than the original boxed order list that we've seen that played a bunch of funky different one-ofs, like Choi and stuff like that. I think that this is a little bit more well refined. The goal here is to really block your opponent's active Pokemon in active spots, and as long as they can't really damage you, there's not really much that they can do. Now, if they can damage you, you might want to be using cards like Accompanying Flute to bring down other Pokemon from their deck, like Radiant Greninja, that might not be able to attack in, let's say, a Roaring Moon EX deck. There's a few ways to shut off your opponent's abilities. With Klefki, cards like Mimikyu might shut down an entire Miraidon EX deck. And there's new ways to draw cards, such as using Enriching Energy, slapping those on a card like Pidgeot, getting it back, with Pidgeot's ability to go over and over and over and over again. I think that this is the build that we're probably going to see a little bit more as players approach Birmingham, Rio de Janeiro, and San Antonio. So if you haven't got a chance to play around with the box order build of Snorlax, I highly suggest trying it out right now. Might be worthwhile because it is one of those decks that could beat Regidrago. Don't necessarily know for sure, but it does beat a lot of other decks. So I think we are going to see more Snorlax in the future. At number 3 this week, we have Charizard EX. Charizard EX and kind of the decks above here kind of make their own top 3, period. I know top 3 is like whatever, but I think that these top 3 are cut above, even above the Snorlax that we just saw at number 4. Charizard EX is arguably the most powerful Pokemon EX that we have in format, having 330 HP, self-accelerating energies to not only itself, but to other Pokemon, and of course its Burning Darkness scales as the game progresses. We can also manipulate the damage with Burning Darkness because of Dusknoir, Dusclops, and of course, we could draw extra prize cards by setting those up with Briar. I feel like this is really the deck that kind of has it all, is a well defined core of a deck as well. So it's really no reason not to run it. The biggest reason not to run this deck is that it doesn't necessarily have a super favorable matchup against Regidrago. It can definitely go toe-to-toe, but if I were to put anything on paper, Regidrago is a little bit more favored. And it's not to put everything around Regidrago, but when Regidrago was 6 of the top 8 in Toronto regionals, there's definitely something where you got to come up with a plan or have an answer to it. So I don't know if Charizard is necessarily the answer to it, but it's the answer to most decks that have an answer to Regidrago, such as those Roaring Moons, Miraidons, Gouging Fires, and Raging Bolts. So Charizard EX will have a place in the metagame for the foreseeable future. Again, I want to give everyone a reminder, since sometimes these videos can get a little bit long and I can ramble on a little bit. Be sure to check out the description to copy and paste any of these deck lists right into PTCG Live. You can play along with the video, put your guesses in the comments for what decks number 2 and number 1 are. I'm sure by all my talks about Regidrago, you might understand that that might be one of those decks, but I'll let the foreshadowing and your idea of the top 10 really get back to you. So we're about to enter into the top 2. Let's see what we got going on at the top of this list. At number 2 this week, we have Gavor EX. Gavor EX has really kind of climbed the ranks of the metagame once again. And I think a lot of players who have been playing Gardevoir are super intelligent players, including our Baltimore regional champion, Henry Chow, Josh Frink, Benny Billinger, Michael Davidson, and they all had great successful runs at Toronto regionals. Being able to play Gardevoir using its Psychic Embrace, loading up a bunch of energies and damage counters to Pokemon such as Drifloon and Screamtail, and using that against their opponents to see success. Using Monkey Dory to move damage counters off your Pokemon with that Darkness energy, and we've kind of gone back to an unfair stamp-based builds. At this point, I just feel like Henry Chow is kind of the resident Gardevoir EX expert when it comes down to it. So anything that they say really goes. And in this case, I'm just taking their list from Toronto regionals, where they made top 16 at the tournament, and going with that. Maybe we'll see in other weeks if Gardevoir EX sees success against against the metagame still. I don't really see it leaving the top 5. Certainly I could leave the top 3, but I do think that this deck, the Charizard deck, and whatever our mystery number 1 deck are, it's really just the definitive top 3 of our metagame, unless we see some drastic metagame shifts, or we see Prismatic Evolution come out, whichever happens first. And in this case, I think Prismatic Evolution's going to really be that shift. And if anything, this deck gets it breathes new life into this deck, with Mewtwo being able to get added into that deck. We're at our number 1 deck of the week. We'll have to see exactly what it is. I'm sure a lot of y'all can already guess it, but for everyone that can't, let's jump into it. Let's see what our number 1 deck of the week is. At number 1 this week, we have Regidrago V-Star once again, and I don't know if any of y'all thought anything was going to change, but with no major events really going on in our Surging Sparks format, Regidrago is going to be on top. Of course, we saw the Champions League in Osaka, but that's not even this format. That is definitely a Prismatic Evolutions based format, so we can't really count it towards it. I'm sure some of y'all thought you might have seen Archaludon or maybe Ancient Box, but we got Regidrago V-Star up at number 1. Regidrago V-Star taking a cue from many past successful decks, being able to copy attacks out of your discard pile. I always kind of go back to that 2019 Mewtwo and Mew winning deck, where you're able to copy from in play, from your discard pile. And in this case, we can copy Alolan Executor EX, Dragapult EX, Tina V-Star, Gudra V-Star, or Kyurem to have an onslaught of attacks at your disposal. And if you just play them in the right order, if you choose better attacks than your opponent, a lot of the times you just win. And being able to self-accelerate with a similar engine as Raging Bolt EX, using Teal Mask Ogerpon to rip those energies, using Energy Switch to move those energies. We have a variety of other attackers, including Mew EX and Radiant Charizard, giving ourselves just like the most answers and the most options out of any deck. This is one of the only decks that can beat pretty much every single deck on this list. All you really need to do is send up a single prize card for one turn against one of those turbo aggressive decks. And if they don't answer that, they just lose the game. So it's one of those things where Regidrago V-Star, this list specifically, or lists similar to this list, just ultra successful. We'll have to see how it continues to go, but I don't really expect this to change too much until at least we see Prismatic Evolutions released elsewhere in the world. Did you have Regidrago V-Star on top of your list? Let me know in the comments below. I do get back to every single person's comments eventually. I know it's been I've probably been a little bit slacking on it with the holidays, but I'm pretty much on my outside of the holidays grind, so I will be back to answering all of those questions, comments, concerns in the comment section. Let me close things out. And that's what we have going on for our top 10 best decks this week. We have Regidrago on top, and I don't know if we're going to see Regidrago get knocked out until after at least Prismatic Evolutions is released. Maybe if you want this deck to not be part of the top 10, you could play Gouging Fire, Roaring Moon, Miraidon, Raging Bolts, sometimes even Snorlax. If you're not playing a deck that's Regidrago, you might want to be playing a deck that beats Regidrago. Otherwise, Regidrago's just kind of sit on top of the metagame and continue to see success. I'm in the same position with San Antonio Regionals coming up. I got to figure out exactly what I want to be doing. Do I want to be playing Regidrago, or do I want to be countering the deck? We'll have to find out and see how I decide my testing over the next few weeks. If you're trying to learn more about any of these decks, be sure to check out my Metafy group. I usually cover more than the top 10 there, going all the way to the top 40 from time to time. So check that out in the description, or you can get some individual coaching from me at metafy.gg/@ZachLassage. Other than that, you can always just give this video a like, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and of course, leaving a comment does help boost the YouTube algorithm so more people can find out about this video. It's probably going to be one of our last videos before 2025, so I wish everyone a great weekend and hope that you enjoy the rest of the content that we have going on over this holiday season. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video. Thanks again. Take it easy. Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes.